Hi, welcome back. In this section, we're going to learn about the physiology that's involved with the female orgasm. So looking at the female sexual response, the first thing is to recognize there are four distinct stages: excitement, plateau, orgasm, then resolution. All of this starts with desire leading to excitement and the stimulation of the parasympathetic nervous system. So let's get started with that first phase, sexual excitement. So due to the increase in parasympathetic response, we're going to have increased blood flow because remember, genitalia is the only place in the body that really has parasympathetic blood vessel innervation. So due to this increased parasympathetic innervation, the labia majora are going to redden and enlarge, and the labia minora also become congested and enlarge in size. The lower part of the vagina, closer to the outside, begins lubricating due to increased blood flow into the area. The Bartholin glands there, or the vestibular gland, and the labia also starts secreting. And the distal third of the vagina actually will constrict, giving a narrower passageway, whereas the upper part of the vagina is going to be dilating in the first two stages. Also during this time, the uterus is tilted forward normally, and at this point, it will tend to rise off of the urinary bladder. Now, in addition to what's going on in the pelvic genitalia, the breasts also can become congested and swollen, and the nipples become erect. In the second stage, the woman is in the plateau stage, where things are still happening. They're just continuing on at a higher level and not increasing drastically. In this stage, the uterus is nearly upright, so much that the cervix has risen out of the vagina. The inner third of the vagina, which widens, also increases in length so that the penis is easier to fit in the vagina. And interestingly, at the distal part, the cervix actually rises higher. The clitoris becomes very engorged, just like the male penis does. But at this time, instead of protruding more, most of the time it actually retracts underneath the prepuce of the clitoris. And the labia continue to be very engorged and reddish and purplish in color. The third stage is where orgasm itself occurs, and this is a sympathetic effect where we have these involuntary contractions of our pelvic organs. So we have that outer third of the vagina, which has constricted and is very congested and tightened. And what is going to happen? We're going to have contractions in a lot of places. For instance, the uterus contracts just like a labor contraction. You might call it peristalsis because it starts at the fundus and works its way towards the cervix. The vagina also tends to have very strong contractions, and we also have contractions in the urethral and anal sphincters as well. Usually there's somewhere around 3, 4, or 5 contractions, and oftentimes these contractions, these orgasmic contractions, occur a second or two after some stillness. And during the time of orgasm, a spreading warmth or a flush can occur over the skin. After orgasm, the fourth stage is resolution, and in this stage, everything returns back to normal, where the uterus drops down to its normal position, the cervix drops down into the pool of seminal fluid, the vagina shortens its length, and all the congestion, all the pelvic organs disappear. What is interesting in the female is that there is no refractory period. In other words, she is able to go and have repeated orgasms. So let's compare the male from the female. So both the male and the female have 4 stages. So I want to start with this drawing on the bottom right, where you can see the excitement in the male sexual response due to a parasympathetic. And then as arousal builds, they're in the plateau period. The shortest of the 4 periods by far is going to be the orgasm, or the third stage. And almost all men experience one intense orgasms. And this is when ejaculation will occur. After the male orgasm, there's a refractory period during resolution where the male is incapable of having another erection or another orgasm. How long this refractory period lasts changes as you age. The refractory period tends to get longer. Now, contrast that to the female on the bottom left, and you'll see there's 3 different colors here. There's a gold, there's a blue, and there's a teal color. So let's start first with number 3, which is the blue one. And what you see is stages of excitement leading to very short plateaus, followed by more excitement, and that leads to an orgasm. And in this case, the female has had 1 orgasm, after which she has resolution and she's done. The second possible, or the second variation on the response is the gold tracing. And in this one, you can see that there is excitement all the way up to the plateau stage, very similar to the male, and then she has an orgasm. But after the orgasm, this she does not completely undergo resolution, but in fact is capable of having a second or a third or a fourth orgasm before resolution occurs back down. And the third variation is the teal color, where you can see the excitement and plateau phases occur, but the woman never reaches an orgasm and then very slowly undergoes resolution from the plateau stage. And in fact, this is what a lot of women have with vaginal intercourse. Now, in addition to these sexual organs, there are physiological responses throughout the body. So I want to start here with section G, where it is showing, first let me show you at the top. It's showing the 4 phases: excitement, plateau, orgasmic, and resolution. And for the upper parts, there's black lines, which means it applies to both male and women. The red lines means it applies to women only, and the blue line means it applies to men only. But let's go down here to G, and what you notice on G is there's no change in sympathetic activity, but there's a marked increase in parasympathetic activity, and that's what causes the influx of the blood flow for all the congestion and the erections. In the plateau phase, we still have increased parasympathetic activity, but now we are kicking in some sympathetic activity. By the time you reach orgasm, there's no more parasympathetic influence happening there or in resolution. This is all sympathetic activity. So let's see what happens. Looking at B, what you can see is as excitement builds up to the time of orgasm, the respiratory rate for both males and females increases. If the female has 1 orgasm, she rapidly returns back to a normal respiratory rate. Where she has multiple orgasms, the respiratory rate stays elevated throughout all the orgasmic activity that there is. The male, after his orgasm, the respiratory rate will return to normal, but notice that it does it in a much slower fashion. Looking at C, which is heart rate, and D, which is mean arterial pressure, you can easily see parallels and almost identical increases in heart rate and blood pressure among males and women until the climax of the orgasm, after which there is a slow resolution towards normal. So this shows that there is a marked increase in cardiac workload during this time. And so this is kind of like having a short-term stress test for people with coronary artery disease. And in fact, it is not unheard of to have heart attacks during sexual activity. And very interestingly, the chances of that happening are actually higher if you are not having sex with your normal partner or spouse, but instead are having some type of illicit affair. And that applies to both men and women. E and F are very interesting because they're showing what's happening in the brain, where not only does systemic blood pressure change, but intracranial pressure will increase and cerebral perfusion pressure occurs. And so if we look at the very bottom at H, which is showing what's happened, for instance, if you have one of those little berry aneurysms in your brain, those congenital defects, what you can see at the time of orgasm, due to these increased pressures, it is not uncommon to burst a berry aneurysm either during orgasm or in the first part of resolution, while all the pressures are markedly elevated. So if you were going to die, dying while having an orgasm is not a bad way to die. However, it's not a pleasant experience for your sexual partner. So with that, we are done learning all about physiological changes that occur during sex for both the male and female. I want to thank you for all your effort in this course, and I will see you soon. Thanks.